The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Camilla adjusted her pearl necklace one final time. She had been preparing for this moment for months, the annual charity gala that would determine the future of several royal patronages. The stakes couldn't be higher, and she knew Kate would be watching her every move. Camilla's hands trembled slightly as she reviewed her speech notes. The words seemed to blur together on the expensive cream paper. She had practiced this presentation countless times in her private chambers, but something felt different today. The familiar tightness in her chest had returned, the same feeling that had plagued her during the most stressful moments of her royal duties. Meanwhile, Kate stood before her bedroom mirror, applying the final touches of her makeup with practiced precision. Her reflection showed no hint of nervousness, only the composed confidence that had become her trademark. She had spent weeks preparing for today's event, not just her appearance, but her strategy. Every detail had been carefully planned. The rivalry between the two women had been simmering beneath the surface for years. What had started as polite disagreements over royal protocol had evolved into something much deeper. Both women understood that today's charity presentation would likely determine who would receive the coveted position of patron for the new Children's Hospital Foundation. It was more than just a title. It represented influence, respect, and ultimately, power within the royal hierarchy. Camilla made her way through the palace corridors, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors. Palace staff bowed respectfully as she passed, but she barely acknowledged them. Her mind was focused entirely on the task ahead. She had worked tirelessly to prove herself worthy of increased responsibilities within the royal family, and this presentation represented the culmination of all her efforts. The grand ballroom had been transformed for the occasion. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the assembled guests, a mixture of wealthy donors, government officials, and members of high society. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Everyone present understood they were witnessing more than just a charity presentation. They were observing a crucial moment in the ongoing dynamics of the royal family. Kate entered the ballroom with her characteristic grace, immediately drawing the attention of everyone present. Her elegant navy dress and subtle jewelry choices projected exactly the image she wanted: sophisticated, approachable, and utterly royal. She moved through the crowd effortlessly, engaging in conversation with key donors and making mental notes about their responses to various topics. As the formal presentations began, Camilla took her place at the podium. The microphone seemed heavier than usual in her hands, and the bright spotlight made it difficult to see the audience clearly. She began speaking about the importance of children's health care, her voice initially strong and clear. The first few minutes went smoothly, with several audience members nodding approvingly at her well-researched statistics and heartfelt anecdotes. However, as Camilla continued speaking, something began to go wrong. The words that had flowed so easily during her practice sessions now felt clumsy and disconnected. She found herself repeating certain phrases and struggling to maintain the thread of her argument. The spotlight seemed to grow brighter and hotter, making her feel increasingly uncomfortable. Kate watched from her position near the back of the room, her expression carefully neutral. She had positioned herself strategically, where she could observe both Camilla's performance and the audience's reaction. What she saw confirmed her suspicions. Several major donors were beginning to look uncomfortable, and whispered conversations had started among some of the more influential guests. The turning point came when Camilla attempted to reference a specific research study about childhood nutrition. Instead of the confident delivery she had practiced, she stumbled over the technical terminology and provided incorrect statistics. A few medical professionals in the audience exchanged concerned glances, and the energy in the room began to shift noticeably. Camilla's breathing became more labored as she realized her presentation was falling apart. The familiar chest tightness intensified, and she could feel perspiration forming despite the air conditioning. She gripped the podium more tightly, trying to regain her composure, but the damage was already done. The confidence she had built up over months of preparation was crumbling before the eyes of everyone who mattered. As she reached the conclusion of her speech, Camilla's voice had become noticeably weaker. The applause that followed was polite, but lacked enthusiasm. She could see the disappointment in the faces of people she had hoped to impress, and the realization hit her like a physical blow. This presentation, which was supposed to establish her credibility and secure her future role, had instead exposed her limitations. Kate's presentation followed immediately after, and the contrast was striking. Where Camilla had struggled with technical details, Kate demonstrated effortless command of complex medical and financial information. Her speaking style was conversational yet authoritative, and she managed to connect emotionally with the audience while maintaining complete professional credibility. The audience's response to Kate was markedly different. Donors leaned forward in their seats, genuinely engaged with her vision for the Children's Hospital Foundation. She painted a compelling picture of innovative treatment programs and community outreach initiatives, backing up every proposal with solid research and realistic budgets. Several wealthy philanthropists began taking notes, clearly impressed by her thorough preparation and genuine passion for the cause. As Kate concluded her presentation to enthusiastic applause, Camilla felt the full weight of her failure settling over her. The comparison between their performances was unavoidable, and everyone in the room understood what they had witnessed. Kate had not only delivered a superior presentation, but had done so with an ease that made Camilla's struggles appear even more pronounced. The networking reception that followed the formal presentations became a form of torture for Camilla. Guests who had approached her earlier with warm greetings now seemed to avoid eye contact. Conversations that should have been about future collaborations instead felt like awkward attempts at consolation. She found herself standing alone near the refreshment table, watching as Kate effortlessly commanded the attention of the room's most important figures. The physical symptoms that had plagued Camilla during her presentation were not improving. If anything, the stress of the social reception was making them worse. The tightness in her chest had become a persistent ache, and she was finding it increasingly difficult to catch her breath. She excused herself from a half-hearted conversation with a minor diplomat and sought refuge in a quieter corner of the ballroom. Kate, meanwhile, was in her element. The success of her presentation had energized her, and she moved through the crowd with renewed confidence. Major donors were already expressing interest in her proposals, and several government officials had approached her about potential partnerships. She could feel the momentum building in her favor, and she knew how to capitalize on it. As the evening progressed, it became clear that Kate had achieved more than just a successful presentation. She had fundamentally shifted the balance of power within this particular sphere of royal influence. The children's hospital patronage that both women had been competing for was now clearly within her grasp, and everyone present understood the implications. Camilla's condition continued to deteriorate as the reality of her situation became undeniable. The chest pains were now accompanied by dizziness and a growing sense of panic. She had experienced stress-related symptoms before, but never to this degree. The combination of professional humiliation and physical distress was creating a perfect storm that she was struggling to manage. She made several attempts to leave the reception gracefully, but each time found herself trapped in conversations with people who seemed determined to offer their sympathies or, worse, their advice about how she might improve her public speaking skills. The well-meaning suggestions felt like salt in an open wound, and she could feel her composure slipping away entirely. Kate observed Camilla's distress from across the room, but her expression remained carefully neutral. Years of royal training had taught her to maintain perfect composure regardless of the circumstances, and she was not about to let her guard down now. However, she couldn't help but notice that Camilla's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. The final blow came when the foundation's board chairman approached Kate publicly to discuss the next steps in the patronage selection process. His words were diplomatically phrased, but the message was clear. Kate was now the preferred candidate, and the formal announcement would be a mere formality. Several guests overheard this conversation, and the news spread quickly through the room. Camilla, who had been nearby when this exchange took place, felt something inside her break. The combination of professional rejection, physical distress, and public humiliation had pushed her beyond her breaking point. The chest pains intensified dramatically, and her vision began to blur around the edges. She knew she needed to find somewhere private immediately, but her legs felt increasingly unsteady. As she attempted to make her way toward the ballroom's exit, Camilla's breathing became rapid and shallow. The elegant gown that had made her feel confident earlier now felt restrictive and heavy. Each step required enormous effort, and she could feel curious eyes following her progress across the room. The whispered conversations that had started during her failed presentation were now focused entirely on her obvious distress. Kate watched Camilla's departure with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. She had achieved everything she had hoped for from this evening. But she couldn't ignore the fact that Camilla appeared to be in genuine medical distress. Royal protocol dictated that she should probably check on her rival's well-being, but the competitive instincts that had driven her success tonight were still very much in control. The palace corridors that had seemed welcoming to Camilla earlier now felt endless and intimidating. Each step was a struggle, and she had to stop several times to lean against the ornate wall panels for support. Palace staff members she encountered offered assistance, but she waved them away, determined to maintain what little dignity she had left. By the time Camilla reached her private quarters, she was in full medical distress. The stress of the evening had triggered what would later be diagnosed as a severe anxiety attack with cardiac symptoms. Her body, which had been operating on adrenaline and determination for weeks leading up to this presentation, was finally rebelling against the pressure she had placed on it. Meanwhile, back in the ballroom, Kate was basking in the glow of her triumph. The evening had exceeded even her most optimistic expectations, and she could already envision the positive coverage this success would generate in the royal press. The children's hospital patronage was just the beginning. This victory would open doors to even greater opportunities within the royal hierarchy. The following morning brought no relief for Camilla. She had spent the night in fitful sleep, plagued by recurring nightmares about her disastrous presentation. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see the disappointed faces of the donors and hear the enthusiastic applause that had greeted Kate's speech. The physical symptoms from the previous evening had subsided somewhat, but the emotional damage felt permanent and overwhelming. Her lady-in-waiting brought the morning newspapers with obvious reluctance. The headlines were even worse than Camilla had feared. Royal correspondents had been present at the charity gala, and their coverage was merciless in its comparison of the two presentations. One particularly cruel article described Camilla's speech as a masterclass in how not to represent the royal family, while praising Kate's performance as the future of modern monarchy in action. Camilla's private secretary knocked gently on her bedroom door, carrying a stack of messages and appointment requests. However, instead of the usual enthusiastic invitations and collaboration proposals, most of the correspondence consisted of polite withdrawals and cancellations. Organizations that had been eager to work with her just days before were now finding diplomatic ways to distance themselves from her tarnished reputation. The most devastating blow came in the form of an official letter from the Children's Hospital Foundation. The board had accelerated their decision-making process and formally offered the patronage position to Kate. The letter was respectfully worded, but Camilla could read between the lines. Her failure at the gala had not just cost her this particular opportunity. It had damaged her credibility so severely that other organizations were already reconsidering their associations with her. Meanwhile, Kate was experiencing the opposite trajectory. Her morning began with a congratulatory phone call from the Queen's private secretary, praising her exemplary representation of royal values and suggesting that additional responsibilities might be forthcoming. Kate accepted the praise graciously, but inside she felt a surge of satisfaction that went beyond mere professional success. The Children's Hospital patronage acceptance ceremony was scheduled for later that week, but Kate was already being approached about other high-profile opportunities. Medical charities, educational foundations, and international aid organizations were all expressing interest in securing her involvement. Her social calendar, which had been respectably full before the gala, was now overflowing with prestigious invitations and meaningful commitments. Kate's success was made even sweeter by the knowledge that she had achieved it through her own merit and preparation. She had not relied on manipulation or underhanded tactics. She had simply outworked and outperformed her competition. The victory felt clean and justified, which made it all the more satisfying to savor. However, as the days passed, Kate became increasingly aware of Camilla's deteriorating situation. Palace gossip traveled quickly, and reports of Camilla's isolated state and canceled engagements were impossible to ignore. While Kate felt no obligation to help her rival, the extent of Camilla's fall from grace was beginning to create awkward situations within the royal household. Camilla's isolation was becoming more pronounced with each passing day. Invitations that had once arrived regularly had slowed to a trickle, and those that did come were clearly token gestures from organizations with existing obligations. She found herself spending increasingly long periods alone in her apartments, unable to face the sympathetic looks and whispered conversations that seemed to follow her everywhere within the palace. The physical symptoms that had manifested during the gala were returning with increasing frequency. Stress-related chest pains, difficulty sleeping, and persistent anxiety were taking their toll on both her appearance and her ability to function effectively. Palace physicians had been consulted discreetly, but their recommendations for rest and stress reduction seemed impossible to implement given her current circumstances. Kate's ascension within the royal hierarchy was becoming more apparent with each public appearance. She was now being seated in more prominent positions at official events, consulted on matters that had previously been outside her purview, and treated with a level of deference that reflected her new status. The contrast with Camilla's diminished role was stark and publicly visible. The media coverage of their respective situations continued to reinforce the narrative of Kate's rise and Camilla's fall. Royal photographers seemed to capture Kate at her most graceful and confident moments, while images of Camilla appeared strained and uncomfortable. The visual storytelling was as powerful as any written commentary, and it was shaping public perception in ways that would be difficult to reverse. Camilla's attempts to rehabilitate her image were met with lukewarm responses at best. A carefully planned visit to a local school resulted in awkward interactions with children who seemed more interested in when they might meet Kate instead. A speech to a women's business organization was competently delivered but received with polite rather than enthusiastic applause. Every public appearance seemed to reinforce rather than challenge the perception of her diminished capabilities. The palace staff began to treat Camilla differently, not with overt disrespect, but with the subtle shift in attention that indicated a change in her perceived importance. Requests took longer to fulfill, appointments were scheduled at less convenient times, and the general atmosphere of urgency that had once surrounded her activities was notably absent. Kate, by contrast, found herself at the center of increased attention and activity. Her office was receiving more requests than she could possibly accommodate, forcing her staff to develop new systems for managing her expanded responsibilities. The Children's Hospital patronage had opened doors that led to even greater opportunities, creating a positive feedback loop that seemed to accelerate with each success. The annual royal family gathering at Balmoral was approaching, and both women knew it would represent a crucial test of their current standings within the family hierarchy. Seating arrangements, speaking opportunities, and informal interaction patterns would all reflect the new reality of their respective positions. For Kate, it would be an opportunity to consolidate her gains. For Camilla, it might represent her last chance to demonstrate her continued value to the royal institution. Camilla began preparing for Balmoral with the desperation of someone fighting for her professional survival. She worked with speech coaches to improve her public speaking abilities, consulted with image specialists about her wardrobe choices, and even explored stress management techniques to help control her physical symptoms. The irony was not lost on her that she was now working harder than ever, but from a position of significant weakness rather than strength. Kate's preparations for Balmoral were markedly different. Instead of desperate remediation, she was focused on strategic advancement. She studied briefing materials about potential new patronages, prepared thoughtful questions about policy matters that might arise in family discussions, and carefully considered how to present herself as ready for even greater responsibilities. The Children's Hospital Foundation was already benefiting from Kate's involvement. Her initial meetings with medical staff and administrative personnel had generated new ideas for fundraising and patient care improvements. Donors who had been hesitant to commit significant resources were now expressing renewed interest in supporting the foundation's ambitious expansion plans. Camilla's exclusion from these developments was particularly painful because she genuinely cared about children's healthcare issues. Her failed presentation had not been the result of lack of passion or commitment. It had been a case of preparation and performance falling short at the worst possible moment. Watching Kate succeed in an area where she had hoped to make her own mark felt like a form of professional torture. The psychological toll of her situation was becoming increasingly difficult for Camilla to manage. She had always prided herself on her resilience and determination, but the sustained pressure of public scrutiny and professional isolation was testing her limits. Sleep problems were affecting her judgment, and even simple decisions were becoming sources of anxiety and second-guessing. Palace life continued around Camilla with a rhythm that no longer included her as a central figure. Important meetings took place without her input, significant decisions were made without her consultation, and the flow of information that had once kept her connected to royal activities had slowed to occasional updates. She was experiencing the isolation that comes with relevance loss, and it was more painful than she had ever imagined. Kate's growing influence was becoming apparent in ways both large and small. Her opinions were sought on matters ranging from state dinner guest lists to charitable foundation priorities. She was being included in planning sessions for future royal tours and consulted about protocol changes that might improve royal engagement with younger demographics. The trajectory of her involvement was clearly upward, with no apparent ceiling in sight. The contrast between their current situations was becoming so pronounced that it was creating discomfort even among palace staff who had witnessed many royal rivalries over the years. Camilla's decline seemed unusually rapid and complete, while Kate's ascension appeared almost effortless in its momentum. The balance of power had shifted so dramatically that it was affecting the entire dynamic of royal household operations. As the Balmoral gathering approached, both women understood that it would likely formalize the changes that had been developing since the charity gala. Kate would arrive as a rising star with expanded responsibilities and growing influence. Camilla would arrive as someone fighting to maintain relevance and hoping to avoid further marginalization. The stage was set for what promised to be a defining moment in both of their royal careers. The morning of the Balmoral gathering dawned crisp and clear, with autumn colors painting the Scottish landscape in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. For Kate, the beauty of the morning felt like a positive omen for the important day ahead. She had chosen her outfit carefully, a sophisticated burgundy dress that conveyed both respect for tradition and contemporary elegance. Her confidence was evident in every measured step as she prepared to join the other family members for what promised to be a pivotal meeting. Camilla's preparations took considerably longer and were marked by persistent anxiety. She had changed outfits 3 times, unable to decide between appearing too formal or too casual for the occasion. Her hands trembled slightly as she applied makeup to cover the dark circles that had become a permanent feature since the charity gala disaster. Every reflection in the mirror seemed to confirm her fears about her diminished status and uncertain future. The Great Hall at Balmoral had been arranged for a formal family discussion about the upcoming year's charitable initiatives and royal responsibilities. The seating arrangement immediately revealed the new hierarchy. Kate had been positioned near the head of the table, while Camilla found herself relegated to a position that suggested her reduced influence. The message was subtle but unmistakable to anyone familiar with royal protocol. As the meeting commenced, Kate was invited to present her vision for the Children's Hospital patronage and related healthcare initiatives. Her presentation was polished and comprehensive, building naturally on the success of her charity gala speech. She outlined ambitious plans for expanding pediatric care programs, establishing educational partnerships with medical schools, and creating innovative fundraising campaigns that would engage younger philanthropists. The family members' responses to Kate's presentation were overwhelmingly positive. Several senior royals asked detailed questions about implementation timelines and resource requirements, treating her proposals with the seriousness typically reserved for major policy initiatives. The atmosphere in the room was one of genuine enthusiasm and support for her expanding role within the royal charitable network. When Camilla was eventually given an opportunity to speak, the contrast was immediately apparent. Her prepared remarks about rural education initiatives seemed modest and poorly developed compared to Kate's ambitious healthcare agenda. Several family members appeared distracted during her presentation, and the questions that followed were perfunctory rather than substantive. The meeting's momentum had clearly been established by Kate's contributions. Following the formal presentations, the family engaged in broader discussions about strategic priorities for the coming year. Kate found herself being consulted on matters well beyond her official responsibilities, with senior family members seeking her input on everything from international diplomatic visits to domestic policy implications of royal charitable work. Her voice was carrying weight that reflected her newfound status as a trusted advisor. Camilla participated minimally in these broader discussions, partly because her opinions were rarely solicited, and partly because she felt increasingly uncertain about her own judgment. The confidence she had once possessed in royal matters seemed to have evaporated along with her public credibility. She found herself second-guessing even basic observations, worried about further embarrassing herself in front of the assembled family. During the lunch break, informal conversations revealed the true extent of the power shift. Kate was surrounded by family members eager to discuss potential collaborations and future opportunities. Meanwhile, Camilla ate largely in silence, occasionally receiving polite but brief acknowledgments from relatives who seemed unsure how to interact with her given her changed circumstances. The afternoon session focused on specific responsibility assignments for the upcoming year. Kate was formally granted oversight of several high-profile charitable initiatives, including the Children's Hospital patronage and 2 international aid organizations. The scope of her new responsibilities was unprecedented for someone at her level within the royal hierarchy, but nobody questioned her readiness for these expanded duties. Camilla's assignments for the coming year were notably reduced in both number and significance. She was asked to continue with several existing commitments, but no new responsibilities were offered, and even some of her current roles were reassigned to other family members. The message was diplomatically delivered, but its implications were crystal clear. As the formal meeting concluded, family members began making plans for the evening's social activities. Kate found her calendar filling with requests for private conversations and strategy sessions. Several senior royals wanted to discuss specific aspects of her new responsibilities in greater detail, and her input was being sought on personnel decisions and policy directions that would shape royal charitable work for years to come. Camilla discovered that her evening was largely unscheduled. While this might have been welcomed under normal circumstances, in the current context it felt like further evidence of her marginalization. She withdrew to her assigned quarters, ostensibly to rest, but actually to avoid the painful reminder of her irrelevance to the important discussions taking place around her. The dinner that evening was an elegant affair, but the seating arrangements reinforced the morning's messages about relative status. Kate was positioned where she could easily participate in conversations with the most influential family members, while Camilla found herself seated between minor relatives whose own influence within the royal hierarchy was limited. The placement felt intentionally symbolic. During dinner, Kate was asked to speak briefly about her vision for modernizing royal charitable engagement. Her remarks were well received and sparked animated discussions about innovative approaches to traditional royal responsibilities. She demonstrated both respect for established protocols and enthusiasm for strategic evolution, striking exactly the right tone for her audience. Camilla had no speaking role during the dinner, which was probably fortunate given her current state of mind. She struggled to follow the various conversations taking place around her, finding it difficult to concentrate on topics that had once energized and engaged her. The social demands of the evening felt overwhelming rather than enjoyable. As the evening progressed, Kate's growing influence became even more apparent. Family members were approaching her for private conversations about sensitive matters, seeking her perspective on issues that extended well beyond her official responsibilities. She was being treated as a trusted confidant and strategic advisor, roles that typically required years of proven service to achieve. The contrast with Camilla's isolation was becoming almost painful to observe. She attempted to engage in conversations, but her contributions were often ignored or politely acknowledged before the discussion moved on without her input. The social dynamics that had once felt natural and comfortable now seemed foreign and intimidating. Later that evening, as family members gathered for informal socializing, Kate found herself at the center of multiple conversations simultaneously. Her success had created a gravitational pull that drew others into her orbit, and she managed the attention with grace and strategic awareness. Every interaction was an opportunity to strengthen relationships and build support for her expanding role. Camilla attempted to participate in these social gatherings, but her presence seemed to create awkward moments rather than natural conversation flow. People were kind but distant, unsure how to interact with someone whose status had changed so dramatically and publicly. She eventually excused herself early, claiming fatigue, but actually seeking escape from the painful reminder of her changed circumstances. In her private quarters, Camilla confronted the full reality of her situation. The events at Balmoral had confirmed what she had feared since the charity gala. Her position within the royal hierarchy had been fundamentally and perhaps permanently altered. The responsibilities she had worked years to achieve were being redistributed, and her influence on matters she cared deeply about had evaporated. The physical symptoms of stress that had plagued her for weeks were intensifying again. The chest pains, difficulty breathing, and persistent anxiety were now accompanied by a crushing sense of professional despair. She had devoted her adult life to royal service, only to see her efforts undone by a single disastrous evening and its cascading consequences. Meanwhile, Kate was experiencing the opposite emotional trajectory. The day's events had exceeded even her most optimistic expectations, confirming her emergence as a major figure within the royal establishment. The responsibilities she had been granted represented not just professional advancement, but genuine opportunity to make meaningful contributions to causes she genuinely supported. As she prepared for bed, Kate reflected on the remarkable transformation her life had undergone in just a few short weeks. The charity gala that had destroyed Camilla's prospects had launched her own career trajectory into an entirely new realm of possibility. She felt grateful for the opportunity, but also proud of the preparation and performance that had made her success possible. The next morning brought final confirmation of the new reality. Kate was included in high-level planning sessions for the royal family's upcoming public engagements, while Camilla was informed that her schedule would be reduced to accommodate her need for recovery time. The language was diplomatic, but everyone understood that this was likely the beginning of a gradual but permanent withdrawal from active royal duties. As the Balmoral gathering concluded, and family members prepared to return to their respective residences, the transformation was complete. Kate departed as one of the most influential members of the Royal Charitable Network, with expanded responsibilities and unlimited potential for further advancement. Her car was followed by vehicles carrying advisors and staff members who would help her implement her ambitious new agenda. Camilla's departure was markedly different. She left alone, with a reduced staff and a dramatically diminished schedule of upcoming engagements. The grand plans she had harbored just months before now seemed like fantasies from another life. The contrast between her current situation and her previous aspirations was too painful to contemplate directly. As Kate's car pulled away from Balmoral, she allowed herself a moment of private satisfaction. She had achieved everything she had hoped for and more, establishing herself as a major figure in royal charitable work and positioning herself for even greater influence in the future. The doors that had opened during the past few weeks led to possibilities she was only beginning to explore. Behind her, the palace doors were literally and figuratively closing on Camilla's former life. The building that had once represented opportunity and purpose now symbolized everything she had lost. As she watched Kate's departure from her window, Camilla understood that this was not just a temporary setback, but a fundamental reordering of her world. The smirk that crossed Kate's face as her car cleared the palace gates was subtle but unmistakable. She had not just won a competition, she had comprehensively eliminated a rival and established herself as the undisputed rising star of the royal charitable establishment. The victory was complete, and the satisfaction it brought was as deep as it was private.